Hello, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you all to the executive meeting, those of you that are here in person and also those watching at home. I was just told, March 2020, when the executive last met in a reduced format, and obviously this is the first meeting since the roadmap has allowed us to meet, albeit still very differently, but in person. And so there are a number of executive members who are not here because of the reduced numbers that we're having at meetings at the moment. And the only change or substitution to note is that Councillor Eyre is attending instead of Councillor Widdowson. And the first agenda item is declarations of interest. Before I do that, I'd like to welcome Councillor Kilbane again to his first executive meeting, and also put on record our thanks to Councillor Myers for his contributions at executive, I think over the last 2 years. With that, are there any declarations of interest that anybody would like to declare? I'll go to Councillor Smalley first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As a director of Make It York, I have an interest in item 7, and so at that point I'll leave the meeting.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
And just checking I can still remember how to use these things. Yes, in relation to item 11, I was until very recently a cycle cargo courier in York, but I am no longer, so no pecuniary interest in that, but just for openness and transparency, I'd let the meeting know that.
Thank you very much. I couldn't see any other indications on that item. So that will then take us on to agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, and they're on pages 3 to 10 in the executive pack. I'll just wait a couple of seconds in case any colleagues wanted to raise any issues. If not, if I could see all of those in favour of accepting the minutes. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting the minutes. I'll have to get used to not looking for virtual hands or quite having to confirm in the same way as the last 12 months. Item 3 is public participation. We have 4 public participants today. They're all joining us remotely and will be telephoning into the meeting, and I'd like to thank them for doing that again to keep the numbers to the lowest possible number in this room. Our first public speaker is Gwen Swinburne, who's registered to speak on agenda items 4, 6 and 7 if necessary, and hopefully this will now work smoothly and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Thank you, Chair. Nice to see you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Chair, most councillors, including some here today, are too new to remember the LGA peer reviews from a few years ago. The standout recommendation was to do less better. Sadly, one of the many recommendations from peers and regulatory bodies ignored over the years. The changing external governance framework and the accepted council-wide democratic and governance failures is more than challenging. Combine this situation with your stated ambition to move to a committee system, and you have a great opportunity today. On the agenda, you have mention of yet another city strategy, a 10-year one this time. If you were to look at the selected strategies the staff uploaded to the website, you will see the majority are out of date with no related performance reporting or updating. May I suggest, Chair, that instead of embarking on yet another strategy with the same few preferred partners, you do not proceed this year with that strategy. Rather, this year, you focus on the less glamorous but essential housekeeping. That is to review all those strategies, evaluate and dispose as necessary. Next, use that evaluation to develop a proper baseline for city strategy process later. Meanwhile, develop a common strategy model and process so that all future strategies come out of the main plan and contribute to it. Meanwhile, the challenging internal and external governance framework needs focus and urgent attention, Chair. As we all know, the public interest report barely scratched the surface. Chair, every aspect of our governance, regional devolution, your commitment to rid us of this awful strong leader system, the democratic deficit of the unparished wards, the dysfunctional so-called ward committees, and the ever-present appalling so-called democratic governance within this authority is all failing. Finally, the dreadful management systems and standards across much of the central department, at least, needs addressing far more than identified in the PIR. This is a long and tedious agenda necessary from a decade of mismanagement of our central service department and inherited from our ever-changing political leadership. If you finally take control of these two areas, direct staff instead of waiting for them to do it, or not to do as they please in their own interests rather than ours, we might stand a chance. As always, Chair, I stand ready to support you and the Council in any efforts to make this a functioning authority. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your comments, that we'll take into account when we get onto the later agenda items. Councillor de Gaulle.
Yeah, I appreciate this was originally a railway station, but in terms of the sound quality that we're getting here in the room, it may be different online, but is it possible to maybe turn the volume down a little bit or just adjust it in some way so that we can hear more clearly what the speakers are saying?
Thank you very much. I'm hearing that we'll try and adjust the volume so that those in the room can hear it, and I'm sure it'll be a trial and error as we go through our first few meetings. I did hear everything the last public speaker said. It's just quite loud for those that are watching. Our second public speaker is Councillor Douglas, who's registered to speak on agenda item 7, Make It York. And Councillor Douglas, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm speaking tonight on agenda item 7, the Council's contract with Make It York. I welcome the proposals in the report before you tonight as first steps in the right direction, particularly to bring the hugely important economic growth and inward investment functions back under the control of the Council. I'm glad the Executive has finally listened to the issues, concerns and concrete suggestions I've brought forward to the Council Leader, Executive Member for Economy and Strategic Development, broader Executive, Budget Council and lead officers over the past 15 months. I'm disappointed my messages made in the interests of the people and economic health of York were rejected, voted against, ignored and then finally adopted. As I said at Budget Council in February, Make It York has failed to give vitally important economic growth functions the attention they deserve. There's been a long-term lack of focus on positively supporting, listening to and collaborating with our city's businesses, all imperative at a time when support is needed most. Decisive action taken now is essential. If you've been listening to the businesses new and established across the city, you will know this is what they are repeatedly telling us all. The concern highlighted in the report that Make It York's operational focus on income generation and therefore inherent competition with other city centre businesses and traders creates a tension with collaborative working with other partners as well as with the pursuit of more strategic objectives. In my opinion, Make It York, as a TCAL company, 100% owned by the Council, under the control of the Council, and delivering services on behalf of the Council, should also take on the principles of the Council. Working for the good of the city, delivering on behalf of the city, and not to maintain, beyond appropriate need, the structure and wage role of the company. I've said it before, a complete organisational overhaul is needed. Work isn't complete here. I hope the next urgent phase of realignment of Make It York to its slimmed down remit won't take so long. The organisation is still unnecessarily bloated in areas and hasn't adjusted its operating model to the changed nature of the global digitised tourism, hospitality and creative industries. Its apparent inability to function as an efficient, responsive, outward-looking organisation still remains a huge risk to the Council. Quite frankly, neither Make It York, the City of York Council, York's hospitality, leisure, culture, market trader and city centre retail sectors, or the people of York can afford, financially or otherwise, for that risk to persist. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that will get taken into account when we consider agenda item 7. Our third public speaker today is Joan Concannon, who's here to talk about the same agenda item at 7, Make It York, as a board member. And Joan, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I'm glad to see that at least some of you are back in person. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the board of Make It York at relatively short notice. So we are very keen. We have worked very productively and intensively with the council over the past couple of months to really be adaptive to the new world that we find ourselves living in, and to work very cohesively around what a new vision for a destination management organisation can be for the city. We remain completely committed as a board to the idea that we work collectively and collaboratively to ensure that this is a city that is in a very strong position to take advantage of any and every opportunity to build back better, to think about the shared prosperity agenda that we all want to see for everyone in the city. So I think there are a number of areas that I would focus on. Really, the opportunity for us to build out the work that started pre-COVID, to think about what the city's offer is to different stakeholders, not least of which are our residents, but also to think about the offer of the city to investors, to new businesses, to be able to support the city's offering in terms of the environmental sustainability agenda, particularly around the tourism strategy and the cultural strategy, which Make It York has really taken a very strong leadership, and where we see really significant opportunities to define a distinctive opportunity to engage with a number of different cohorts in terms of how we can build what the offer of the city is, how we can really shape sustainable tourism in the future. We see really significant opportunities to build on the work of the cultural strategy, to develop an early evening economy that develops vibrancy, working really closely with partners in the city, to think about all those opportunities around placemaking to support what York is known for, not just nationally, but also worldwide. We think there are significant opportunities to really support the new economic strategy of the city by creating that narrative, that really clear understanding of how the city is shaped to drive its post-COVID recovery. So we are absolutely intent on using the board's experience, the international experience of the team at Make It York, and the perspectives that they bring to help the city to be part of an ecosystem. And I use that word quite deliberately. I don't think any one organisation in this city can do everything that the city requires for the good of its residents to ensure that we have not just economic growth, but inclusive economic growth. We see that opportunity from a marketing perspective. We see it from the opportunity to engage our residents and to think about all of the factors that make cities very successful, this kind of cities that people want to live in, that they feel the quality of life is absolutely what they want. We are committed as a board to helping the city in every possible way that we can in order to achieve what we all seek, which is a really sustainable economy, a really sustainable and beautiful place to live, and the opportunity to tell the world about how special York is. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for your comments, which we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 7. Our fourth public speaker today is Councillor Crawshaw, who's registered to speak on agenda items 10, 11 and 12. And Councillor Crawshaw, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I'd first just like to briefly take the opportunity to welcome the appointment of Councillor Kilbane as the new leader of the Labour Group. And as you mentioned, I've got comments on items 10, 11 and 12. I'm going to work backwards, beginning with agenda item 12, which is York's response to the National Bus Strategy. There's a line in the report that says that Tadcaster Road has 5 bus operators, each with their own ticketing system. And I think that tells you all you need to know about what's wrong with a deregulated bus network. If we want to make York as accessible as possible, whilst at the same time reducing car dependency, we need cheap, simple to use and frequent public transport links from and between the villages, suburbs and centre of town. People need to be confident that they won't have to wait ages for a bus, to know that they'll be able to get home again at the end of the day and that they won't be charged the earth for a ticket. That requires strategy and cooperation. Recent moves towards contactless payment options are welcome, but I'd like to see guaranteed frequency of service at the times people actually need them. And I'd like to see a vastly simplified fare structure, or best of all, flat fares for any journey in York. Cities like Edinburgh can do it, so why can't we? I understand that the Department for Transport will require us to undertake 6 monthly progress reviews on this agenda, so I would like to suggest a role for scrutiny in this specific aspect. On agenda item 11, the idea of first and last mile deliveries was being discussed when I was elected back in June 2017. And I know that Councillor Melly has done a lot of work pushing for action on this before Christmas, as she felt that the focus of our transport policy didn't include sufficient planning, strategy, or consultation with couriers and freight delivery companies. So while some progress is broadly welcome, it's a shame it's taken so long, not least as it should have been abundantly clear that a last mile strategy would be needed when agreeing the Ring of Steel and associated expansion of the foot streets in the city centre pre-pandemic. On agenda item 10, York's local transport plan, Labour Group is glad to finally see some progress, and we sincerely hope that it's possible to thoroughly and comprehensively develop an ambitious plan well before the next local elections or any potential local government restructures. As such, we look forward to working together alongside York Civic Trust to make the plan as good as it can be and ensure it's implemented properly. What a pity, though, that we have wasted 18 months since the successful motion to council calling for such a plan to be developed. And why, I wonder, did the leader initially rule out an all-party working group on this when we met back in January 2020? I'm pleased to see explicit reference to disabled people as key stakeholders in developing any transport strategy, and I note too the equalities implications at the end of the report, in which it says the local transport plan has a critical role in promoting equality of access to the transport network and by implication to the opportunities afforded by the use of York's transport network. Engagement and consultation are of course going to be key, but I must caution against simply asking people to recount their received wisdom or their preconceived ideas. The climate emergency is real, and we need to find alternative ways of using and getting around our city. That needs a well thought out programme of genuine engagement with alternative models and visions for the city being put forward. We need clarity around the core aims of improving accessibility for everyone across the whole of York, whilst explicitly acknowledging the problems associated with continuing to allow private motor vehicles to dominate public spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider agenda items 10, 11 and 12. I'm sure exec members will give feedback afterwards. I don't know whether it's speed or volume or just this room with public speakers, and hopefully we can tweak that for future meetings, although I'm sure it was clear on the live stream as well. So I'd like to thank all 4 public speakers for taking part, who hopefully now will continue to watch the meeting. Before we go on to agree the forward plan, there'll be a slight change to the agenda, and I'm just going to invite Neil to give us an update at this stage on agenda item 9, Heslington Neighbourhood Plan. Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Heslington Parish Council have asked that the Executive agree the deferral of agenda item 9 in order that the Parish Council can give further consideration to the matters raised by the examiner's report into the Neighbourhood Plan. If agreed, this referral will be in accordance with the Neighbourhood Plan regulations.
Thank you very much. So at this stage, we're simply noting the deferral of that item to a future executive agenda. Thank you very much, Neil. So that then takes us to agenda item 4, which is the forward plan on pages 11 to 14. I'll just give a couple of seconds in case colleagues wanted to raise anything, and then I'll ask to see those that are in favour of accepting the forward plan, please. So if I could see that now, even in person, Councillor Waller, and we might just, unless you don't, of course, that's great. So that's a clear majority in favour of accepting the forward plan. We'll now move on to agenda item 5, which is the recovery and renewal strategy May update, and I'll ask Ian to introduce this to us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just start by just reflecting on what you said earlier, which is the last time we had an executive in person was March of 2020. And I think I would just like to, take this opportunity really to thank our staff for what they have done during that period. Their response has been truly incredible across all areas, and I do very much just want to put that on record again. Clearly, I have done that a number of occasions during the year, but as we are returning to the office, I think it's relevant to make that comment. I think clearly in terms of this report, the position in terms of the latest update in terms of the virus, the position still remains that cases in York are low. They remain lower than national average and significantly lower than regional average. And clearly we hope that continues. The vaccination programme continues in York. And clearly we are hoping that that will all be positive and that the recovery, the process of return to some form of normality continues. We touch upon in the report also some issues in terms of the return to the office. And I think it's worth just highlighting that clearly as we return, we do know that many people want to return, and clearly that's opportunity to come together to discuss issues in person is important, and it's also important for people's well-being. It's not been without its challenges for some people, I think, to remain working from home. Clearly, government guidance has been for people wherever possible to work from home, but I think we do need to recognise that in some cases that has presented challenges. And so there will be a gradual return to the offices, and details are set out in the report in terms of that. I think the other area I just would like to highlight, I think, is that clearly we are not alone in terms of, some of those challenges, in terms of how do you keep some of the flexibility, but return staff to the offices, but do so in a very safe way. But there are opportunities, I think, in terms of how we might seek to use our offices flexibly and more efficiently, and also how we might actually seek to potentially get further economic growth by attracting businesses to York who maybe have predominantly previously been in London, but actually they are downsizing their office space, and there's opportunities for us to look and really promote York as a place for people to locate their business, to have touchdown space. So I do think there is a positive future in terms of how we can maybe take some of the opportunities of flexible working. I'll stop at that point, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think, as you said, Ian, a great deal has happened since our last report in April, even more so when you consider when we last met together, having now reached step 3 of the government's roadmap only a few days ago. And before I touch on some of the details in the report, I know a lot of people will be concerned about the spread of the variant first found in India. To reassure residents, here in York, we have had very few cases of the Indian variant. Public Health England have investigated those cases and no further action has been required. In some areas of the country, having a variant of concern has led to surge testing. We have not been required to do this, but we do have surge testing plans in place should it ever become necessary. Working with our partners, positive tests in the city are routinely examined for variants, and we continue to monitor the situation both here and across the region. Where any cases are identified, enhanced contact tracing will be put into place. Turning to the report, I think there are many reasons where we can be confident in York's recovery from the pandemic. I'm pleased to see that the council's own commercial estate remains close to capacity and that there is strong demand for small office or workshop space in the city. I would particularly like to welcome paragraph 14, which gives an excellent example of the continued investment in our city. I think many people will also welcome that the council has committed further funding from the COVID local support grant to provide additional free school meals during this month. 50,000 of the 98,000 has been used to provide free lunchtime meals for young people who receive free school meals. An additional 100,000 of the COVID outbreak management funding will be used to support people with vulnerabilities and residents from minority backgrounds. With restrictions easing, we continue to work on plans to support work, as has been mentioned, to return to office-based working. And as detailed in paragraphs 18 to 23, from June, some staff will begin to return to West offices, with a further phase of staff to return from September. This phased approach will allow testing of hybrid arrangements and new working styles. Lastly, now that we have reached step 3 of the roadmap, I'd again encourage everyone to continue to follow the latest public health guidance. When you do travel into town or visit our city, please support our many fantastic local businesses, many of whom have now reopened following some incredibly difficult months. And more importantly, please enjoy what York has to offer safely. And on that, I'll open the item for any questions or comments. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking on some of the points that you raised in your introduction. Monday saw a major step forward with many businesses welcoming people indoors, and I'd like to pay tribute to the amount of effort the hospitality and leisure industry has put into the steps taken to make sure that the reopening is done as safely as possible. And I've engaged with the Council's public health team to understand and underline the efforts that are being made to keep residents and visitors safe. We're always conscious of the potential of a variant reaching this city. So there has been a huge amount done to provide advice, and I'm pleased that the COVID support marshals have been maintained to the end of the year. It is a long-term reopening that we're looking at, and testing is crucial to combating the virus, and it's excellent to see the opening of a city centre testing facility aimed at visitors to get themselves tested. As not everywhere will have the provision of York, and I appreciate that there have been a wide range of facilities available for people to pick up their packs, and I went to Foxwood Community Centre and picked up mine, so I'm stuffing up my nose and whatever to make sure that the tests are taking place. So it's important to recognise the success of the vaccination programme and the steps being taken with public health, CCG and Neighbours Care to ensure that the offer of the vaccine is being taken up and improving access to the vaccine, particularly in the younger and student populations. And it's making sure that everyone has the ability to take up that offer, and that the teams out there are encouraging and finding out why people who could be taking it haven't yet. So it's important to make sure that everyone avails themselves of that. We'll continue the pressure on government to lobby for financial support, conscious that if there are changes to the 21st of June point in the roadmap, if that is delayed, then there does need to be a compensatory change made to support businesses. Indeed, there are crucial times ahead for businesses. They will need to start raising profitability so they can start to pay back the loans and other costs that have been accrued. So it's a long haul ahead of us, but I'm sure that the enthusiasm of businesses to make sure that they're operating as efficiently and safely as they can. And like you, Chair, I take heart from paragraph 14, the subsidiary of Bosch, ETAS. I'm told that they've provided 2 billion bits of software for cars around the world, and so it's one of those companies that successfully operate out of the city, and they are looking forward to expansion, and I look forward to working with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Waller. I can't see any further indications. So we've got the recommendations in front of us between pages 15 and 22. If I could please see those in favour of accepting those. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. And that moves us on to agenda item 6, which is an update on the council plan and progress towards a city plan. Ian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. When the council plan was originally approved, it was always the intention that we would bring it back on an annual basis, both to reflect on progress that had been made, and also where required to potentially refocus the attention on certain areas. I don't think anyone, when we set out the original plan, was envisaging what has clearly taken place over the last year or so. And clearly the plan that is presented to you tonight, whilst obviously retaining all the aspects of the original plan, does seek to focus on many of the key issues that we know as a city and as a council we need to respond to in relation to COVID. I don't think anyone should understate the challenges that do face both the council and the city and residents and businesses. And as we move forward, there's a very need for a strong, positive and innovative response, both from the council, but also from the city at large. And you'll see in the report reference to the development of the 10-year plan, and that is very much around aspects from the city and bringing other organisations together to develop that response. Just one or two other things I would just highlight, I think, in the plan. Near the end of the plan, there was a section which talked about working with partners. And I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that our work, certainly during the last year or so, with partners has greatly developed. And I think, you know, I'd pay tribute to many of those partners, particularly clearly the NHS, but also the voluntary sector, and also partners who are on the local resilience forum. And that strength of partnership working, which has been required to deal with the COVID issues, clearly we want to continue that and to build upon that. And there are, you know, examples of where we can continue to do that. The development of the Health and Care Alliance being one of those. Many other aspects, and clearly there's a lot of detail in the plan, many challenges facing the council, but clearly how we support adults, how we support children, their well-being, their mental health are important. And also, as has been already referenced tonight, how the council supports businesses going forward. And clearly things like the economic strategy are crucial in terms of that. And just finally, as an organisation, we also need to adapt. And we talked briefly in the previous report about change in terms of how we might work, but also we'll need to continue to drive out efficiencies. I probably don't need to remind you that there are significant financial challenges which have been faced and will continue to be faced. So there's a range of issues, and clearly the plan sets out some of that work, and obviously we will continue to bring further reports to executive in coming months on various issues. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much. As has been mentioned, the scale of the challenge and brought about by the pandemic is significant. And as a council, we must readjust and reframe our overarching strategy to take account of that new landscape. I think paragraph 16 provides a good summary of why this work needs to take place. The pandemic has clearly made existing challenges much more difficult, whilst at the same time presenting entirely new questions that we must address. I think it's really important to highlight that the objectives of the council plan will not be changing, and the outcomes defined in the plan will remain the same. This is so that we can keep the focus on other issues such as the climate emergency, inequality, and investing in our local communities. Instead, the updates to the plan, which are highlighted in Annex 1, are intended to provide much needed context to the plan following the pandemic and the additional activity now required to achieve our council plan objectives. And at the same time, work continues to take place with partners to develop the 10-year city plan, so that many organisations across the city in the public sector and businesses, for example, can work together to overcome the big challenges that we face. And after all, that plan must be for the city and owned by the city. And that will be more than just another council strategy, but instead to provide direction and vision to develop a positive future for York. And with that in mind, I'm very happy to propose the recommendations in paragraph 4, and just open that for any questions or comments. If not, we have the recommendations. Councillor Kilbane.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and the updates. Just in the plan on page 56, we've got reference to affordable homes for key workers, and then again on page 91, action point 52, which talks about creating a greater number of affordable homes. And this is, of course, especially relevant given the news today that there's been a surge in demand for homes in York by 76%, I believe, according to Rightmove, I think was the survey was done, which of course is putting even more pressure on an already overheated housing market in the city. Given that in the plan we're going to build about 40 affordable homes a year over the next 5 years, and given that we're losing about 60 a year through Right to Buy, which means that we've got a net loss of about 20 affordable homes year on year, can you explain to residents how this plan is going to make it affordable for our key workers to live anywhere in York, for our children to live anywhere in York, or are they just going to have to leave the city if they want affordable accommodation?
Thank you very much for the question. I don't know whether Neil or Ian, you wanted to answer that first, and then any colleagues might want to come in.
So I think Councillor Kilbane, you're referring to the houses going to be directly built by the council in their housing delivery programme. Clearly, the local plan indicates that there are in the order of 4,000 homes to be built that are classed as affordable homes in the lifetime of the local plan. So it's not just the council undertaking that affordable housing build out. So I would just reference that as a document for you to consider.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I think, probably echoing what Neil said, that the council is not the solution to house building entirely in this city. It's a mixed model of terms of probably the highest level of council house delivery for a very long time, which is delivering significant amount and high levels of affordable housing than the private sector would do. But housing will continue in this system to be operated primarily through the private sector, and by getting our local plan adopted, which will lead to in the region of over 900 homes per year, of which a policy position of 20% will deliver far more than 40. The council is not the solution to building all homes in the city. We've taken a very positive step in terms of delivering more than any council in living memory. We will continue to do so. We will continue to over-deliver on affordable housing, and we'll continue to deliver on public realm improvements off the back of that housing delivery.
Thank you very much. Conscious that we've got a lot of agenda items, so I'll absolutely come back to you, Councillor Kilbane, but more for further questions. Councillor Kilbane.
Obviously delighted to hear that the local plan is the answer to affordable homes in the city. When can we expect that to be adopted?
So there's a different question on the local plan, Neil, if you could start on that one too.
So the local plan is currently with the planning inspector, and then the nature of that process is such that the planning inspector will ultimately determine when we go to adoption, but I would expect sometime in late 2022 is a reasonable ambition in terms of the delivery time frame.
Thank you very much. I can't see any further comments. So we've got the recommendations in front of us between pages 23 and 114. If I could please see those in favour of accepting those recommendations. So Councillor Waller, this whole in-person versus virtual, it's a good test, isn't it? To just double check. So that's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. That moves us to agenda item 7, which is the council's contract with Make It York between pages 115 and 148. I know Councillor Smalley will be leaving the room. Welcome Charlie to the table to introduce this to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report represents the culmination of a careful process of stakeholder engagement and consultation to define what should be the key areas of focus for the Council and for Make It York going forward in the spheres of economic development, the visitor economy, city centre management and culture, and to agree which organisation is best placed to deliver on the particular priorities identified within each sphere. Above all, the service level agreement priorities contained in Annex A of this paper aim to facilitate closer and more collaborative working arrangements between the Council and Make It York. The paper sets out a mechanism to assess the contract price. It's now been calculated in discussion with Make It York that the cost to the Council of employing the post-transferring from Make It York's economic development function will be £212,000 per annum, and the contract price will therefore reduce by that amount, taking it down to a net contribution of £112,000 per annum. The paper also sets out proposed amendments to both the company's memorandum and articles of association and to the form of the service contract in order to give effect to the improved governance arrangements agreed by the executive in February and to ensure that Make It York is able to operate effectively as a tech-hub company. These are set out in Annex C. Following the executive's decision on this paper, the Director of Governance will carry out the actions required to give effect to these changes, and the Director of Place and the Director of Customer and Communities, in consultation with the Director of Governance, will then take the necessary steps to enter into the contract between the Council and Make It York.
Thank you very much for that. And open agenda item 7 for any comments or questions. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank officers for the time that they put into these discussions and negotiations, and also in conducting the survey, extensive survey of what businesses and residents thought across the city. It's actually been quite a long journey. I raised a number of points in March 2015 when I was then chair of the Economic Development Scrutiny Committee. And I'm highly delighted that Councillor Douglas did take my advice and she listened to what I'd said at that meeting, and she seemed to have aligned her thinking to that. So I am grateful for that. But I think the worries that were expressed at the time of the outsourcing were really confirmed during the response to the pandemic, that by combining the teams working with the other teams which were handing out government grants, but also really getting to grips with understanding the pressures and concerns that businesses, micro businesses, self-employed people in the city were facing. And I think we've never had such a strong link as we have now with understanding what the many thousands of people in small businesses in the city face. So I think it's important to recognise that 87% of city stakeholders who took part in the consultation recognised the proposals in this paper as the way forward. I'm delighted to hear John Concannon on behalf of the directors of the board of Make It York, spelling out the way in which the way forward, looking to the recovery, looking to ensuring that York gets its share of the sustainable growth, the positioning of itself for sustainable tourism. I think that's a very strong feature on the build back better and actually putting some flesh on those bones. So I think it's important that we really do adopt this policy tonight, because we do really need to get on with the business in hand, because it is crucial that on behalf of the young people in the city who are just setting off on their careers, those people who've lost their jobs and are seeking new opportunities, and the change in skills and training that will be needed, and pay tribute to those members of staff across the council who've been working with partners to keep that going, to keep all of those strategic plans in operation. So I think it's important to make sure that we adopt this policy tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waller. And just checking any more comments or contributions. If not, we have the recommendations in front of us between pages 115 and 148. Councillor Kilbane.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Obviously, we welcome the return of the Inward Investment Unit back into the council. We're bound to welcome it, really. We've been calling for it for long enough. So that's good to see. That's great. And just a question, really. It would also be good to hear how we're going to ensure that, you know, while Make It York does enough to wipe its face, it's not in competition with some of our local businesses, and also what we're going to do to make sure it's an efficient organisation that is actually fit for purpose in this post-COVID world of tourism and culture and placemaking.
Thank you very much. Charlie.
Yes, I think on the point, Chair, about competition, there are a couple of key strategic opportunities mentioned in the report. For example, Make It York's contribution and participation in the My City Centre exercise, in the requirement on Make It York to produce a market strategy, as well as, of course, the culture strategy and so on. And all of these will require a reflection by Make It York and the council on the appropriate role of the company within that greater economy of York. So I think through those more strategic approaches, it will be helpful for Make It York to take that broader strategic role rather than simply being seen as an independent business, if you like, or a competitor to other organisations and providers. So I think that would be that. I can't remember what the second question was, I'm sorry.
Councillor Kilbane.
Just making sure that it is an efficient organisation fit for purpose.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, there are a number of governance changes here that create greater transparency, a closer client arrangement, the quarterly narrative that will then be reported through to the decision-making process as part of the economic monitor. So a number of transparency features. We will, of course, continue to monitor the support package that was put in place by the executive in December, and we will need to continue to monitor the financial performance of the company, continue to face clearly a very challenging economic position, and that will require continued discussion with the company to make sure that they're able to stay on track. But there will be, close liaison through the client process and collaborative discussion as we go forward.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendations between pages 115 and 148. If I could please see those in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you, Charlie. We now move to agenda item 8, which is on school capital works at Applefields Special School and Danesgate Pupil Referral Unit. This is between pages 149 and 162. And now that Councillor Smalley is back at the table, Maxine, welcome, and over to you.
The report outlines a request to begin a programme of capital works at Applefields Special School and Danesgate, at the Danesgate community. This is in order to achieve meet the sufficiency duty at both sites. In the case of Applefields, there are current pressures on space, on teaching space, which have been caused by the growth in the secondary numbers, which has been happening over the last few years. So the plan at Applefields is to repurpose some internal space to create greater classroom space to absorb the increase in pupil numbers, which is part of an overall increase in the secondary numbers across the city. The plan is to do the work in 2 phases. Phase 1 will create the additional classroom space, And in order to create that additional space, it will involve some repurposing of administrative space in the school, and that will be addressed in phase 2. So the priority is to create additional teaching spaces for the children in phase 1, and then to repurpose administrative space, office space, which will be lost through phase 1. The Danesgate community is a piece of work to remodel the site to ensure that it is working better to meet the needs of children and young people who are currently supported by the Danesgate community and have a primary need of social, emotional, mental health. They require the Danesgate site to be remodelled to allow a more efficient delivery of the curriculum to them. There's been a move to regroup children on the site and move away from highly personalised one-to-one delivery into small group delivery, which provides better curriculum delivery for them, means that their needs are being better addressed, and that means that the adaptations required to the site will actually create more appropriate teaching spaces for them. It will also address condition issues which have developed over time at the site, and that is condition issues related to the buildings, but also to the broader site itself. So there are some conditions issues related to fencing, which need to be addressed to make the site more secure, and also there will be issues addressed around transport and the movement of transport around the site. The total budget required to make these adaptations to Applefields is 765,000, and a more significant investment at Danesgate of 1.9 million. But that reflects the remodelling that's needed to address both the efficient operation of the site, but also some of the condition issues that have built up over time. The executive is asked to approve the schemes and to delegate authority to enter into the tendering for these schemes to the Director of People, and that would be done in consultation with the Director of Governance around the necessary procurement issues related to the awarding of the contracts.
Thank you very much for that. I'll open it for questions and comments. As the executive member for Children, Young People and Education could not be here, I'm going to ask Councillor Eyre with the Finance Portfolio to start.
Thank you. Heavy lays the crown of he who substitutes for not just Councillor Widdowson, but also Councillors Cuthbertson and Orrell, and I hope to do them some level of justice in summing up in what's been proposed. Obviously, very pleased to welcome this report. The funding proposed will create additional places for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. Applefields, which is a school very close to my own ward, we're taking this opportunity to improve and upgrade the current teaching suite. Perhaps more importantly, we're improving the layout of the classrooms and providing a better environment for those students that are in there and better enabling them to learn. I think as paragraph 36 alludes to, we'll be able to accommodate the needs for the cohort coming in 2021 and provide the necessary level of facilities for staff through to 2022. Obviously, pressures will continue through that period. Danesgate, which I think is perhaps Councillor de Gaugne's ward over on the other side, again, we're taking a bigger opportunity here to reconfigure the entire site. Again, this will allow teaching staff to better support pupils who have a wide range of different and complex needs. As the report alludes to, there are particular issues with class sizes being a little bit too big and moving those down to smaller sizes, which allows for a better learning environment again. I think paragraph 70 in particular highlights the issues around class sizes. And again, we're providing a better learning environment, which will allow people to thrive. Overall, I'm pleased to see £2.6 million being invested in some of our most important local schools, and would happily support the recommendations at paragraphs 2 and 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor de Gaugne.
Just in the interests of transparency, as has been referred to, Danesgate is in my ward and had conversations about issues such as fencing and the sort of the detail of, but very much support what's proposed here in terms of the service needs of the changes that are proposed.
Thank you very much. Just give a few seconds in case any other questions or comments. We've got the recommendations in front of us between pages 149 and 162. Could I please see those in favour of accepting those recommendations? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those. Thank you, Maxine. We will now move on to agenda item 10, which is York's local transport plan that starts at page 329. And I'll hand over to Neil to introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report has been considered by the Executive Member for Transport at his decision session on the 11th of May. It is recommending the commencement of a local transport plan consultation with a two-phase approach, resulting in a strategic plan adoption, followed by further detailed delivery documents later in 2022. The local plan will have significant impacts on the community, and it will generate significant interest from a number of parties across the city. The governance arrangements of paragraphs 25 and 26 have therefore been proposed to ensure cross-party and stakeholder and community engagement in the process of developing the plans and the delivery documents thereafter. For clarity, the arrangements of paragraph 25 are similar to those in place for the Outer Ring Road and York Central members' bodies, and the opening line in paragraph 26 should say all party rather than all member. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Councillor de Gorne was looking forward to all 47 turning up at the different sessions, but Councillor de Gorne.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, and apologies it wasn't spotted at the decision session previously. I would also want to welcome not just this report, but the comments from Councillor Crawshaw, which I've no doubt will be considered as part of the process. But we move forward, which has been outlined in the report. Even just with the development of the stadium and Monk's Cross, it was obvious from that point that our existing transport plan needed to be updated. So I'm delighted to be able to lead on this work at this stage. It's even more vital now to support progress in decarbonising transport by 2030 and deliver attractive, sustainable options to underpin the development plans within York's local plan, which we referred to earlier. As noted in paragraph 5, LTP 3 was published back in 2011, so that's 10 years ago now, under the auspices of Councillor Galloway. A lot of that has happened in the last 10 years, and particularly our collective awareness regarding the climate emergency. Of course, a great deal has been achieved within LTP3 as referenced in paragraph 10, including the new clean air zone, 33 electric buses in the past year, now in use across the city, the changes to the foot streets and more generally improvements to pedestrian and cycle infrastructure, such as Scarborough Bridge. Nonetheless, as mentioned in the report, the roads in York do remain congested, and this is causing adverse effects such as air pollution. Despite government financial support, the pandemic really does pose a serious threat to bus and rail services as the operators seek to recover passengers that have been lost during the last year. Regardless of the final detail in the report, the long-term future of transport in York will be very different from what it is now. Whether that's because of remote and hybrid working, which we talked about a little bit, home working, development of new transport options, and policy is changing. So, for example, we have rapidly expanding e-scooter network, which will cater for more local trips. And we have the good news today nationally on the flexible ticket options that will be offered to try and cater for new travel and working patterns. We must continue this development and seize these opportunities to develop a local transport plan that will deliver real improvements to the lives of people in York and make zero carbon options a natural choice for all. As referenced in paragraph 8, it's anticipated a full draft of the new local transport plan will be ready for consultation in this winter, this coming winter. As mentioned in previous reports, this will be part of a wider and more holistic engagement plan that the Council is undertaking to seek people's views on a range of issues, such as the most beneficial options to achieve zero carbon by 2030, and thus tackle the growing destruction of ecosystems across the planet, as well as the more local threats, such as flooding and extreme weather events. So with that in mind, I'm happy to recommend approval.
Thank you very much, Councillor de Gorne. Open the item for any further questions or comments. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. There is a typo in it, though, another typo on page 333, paragraph 20, where it says the full council motion to reduce car use in central York. I mean, as we know, the full council motion is to eliminate non-essential car use in York, so that probably needs changing. But in general, we obviously welcome this. We welcome the all-party approach to it. We hope all parties will get on board. We did pioneer that all-party approach. The question that I've got is, I'm assuming we are going to stick to these timescales, but once it's done, what's the implementation sort of program going to be? How soon will we be looking to implement it?
Thank you very much. Neil?
Accept your point in respect of it was non-essential vehicles in that full council motion, absolutely. So we'll make sure that's amended for the record. And in terms of the timetable, that will obviously be a matter for members as to the adoption of the strategy itself, and then subsequently the documents thereafter will be developed on that with that cross-party group. So again, to the extent that there is agreement, I can see a speedy programme, but clearly there as highlighted by Councillor de Gaulle, there are many competing interests around transport. So I no doubt that it will be, should we say, some protracted discussions when it comes to the delivery daughter documents, and therefore it'll be a matter for members as to how quickly we proceed.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us between pages 329 and 352. Councillor Smalley.
Sorry, I'll pile on as well. Just
there's all this late indication.
I know.
Not voting. I won't be able to come.
Apologies, Chair. And I won't take long to speak on this item, as Councillor de Gaugne's already covered many of the key aspects of the papers in front of us. However, I would just like to take the chance to note that to the extent to which the achievements against LTP3 outlined in paragraph 10 will feed into the aspirations and goals of LTP4, from progress on major infrastructure projects such as station frontage, Castle Gateway, Hexby Station, York Outer Ring Road dualling, to the expansion of the electric bus fleet, as well as cycle lanes and foot streets, and of course the introduction of the UK's first and currently only voluntary clean air zone. In fact, myself and my ward colleagues were just outside the KFC on Clifton Moor yesterday morning, and we weren't eating, but we were looking at where the new cycle and pedestrian underpass would be when the ring road dualling occurs. And I think that's probably a really good example of how these are very big projects, but for the local communities, they'll have real meaningful positive impacts to make sure it's a much better pedestrian cycle friendly area to live. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all the many motorists that hooted us as we were stood next to the roundabout. The rather poetic description of what transport in our city could look like in a decade in paragraph 16 really highlights the amount of work that has already begun to ensure that our city can respond to the many current and longer term challenges facing our city within the LTP4 period. As outlined in the report, it's clear that York's fourth local transport plan will preside over a decade of pervasive change, and it will set out not just how York responds to the change, but how it secures a mandate to develop policies and schemes to allow the city to take advantage of those key environmental, societal and public health aspirations. And with that said, I'm happy to endorse the report and the approach set out within it.
Thank you very much for that. So we have the recommendations in front of us on agenda item 10. Can I please see those in favour of accepting them? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. That takes us to agenda item 11, reducing emissions for first and last mile light goods deliveries in York. And I'll hand back to Neil.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to report that the Council has successfully been awarded 297,000 from the DFT under the Air Quality Grant Scheme. The funding will allow the Council to undertake feasibility and pilot project work in respect of the last mile deliveries. And the timing of this work is very fortuitous in that it will allow us those outcomes from that feasibility and project work to be considered in the development of the LTP, and in particular, the practicality of the daughter delivery documents that we intend to produce in 2022.
Thank you very much, Neil. Councillor de Gaulle.
Yes, I again very much welcome this and the very impressive news about winning the funding to be able to deliver this project. Many residents will know that despite all the work that we've done on encouraging drivers to switch off engines when waiting outside schools or for deliveries, there are areas of pollution that require further action to improve air quality. So we have to have the greatest impact of achieving this, it's proposed this funding is used to focus on tackling emissions from delivery vans, HGVs and LGVs, which might be collecting or delivering goods in and around the city centre in particular. As the report details in paragraph 11, the fastest growing expansion of vehicle movements in urban areas are these vans and local light goods vehicles. Obviously, some of that in recent year has been related to the growth of home delivery and the changing business model to respond to the pandemic. More specifically, it's proposed a greater focus on first and last mile, because that's the most opportunity to make a change in terms of those emissions and congestion. So we do want to be proactive in this work, and so it's proposed we use this for both a feasibility study and more detailed work. The councils will engage with local businesses and delivery companies as absolute assurance that that will be the case in this. We'll harness the expertise of those who are already engaged in this area of operation to ensure we can develop the best possible options going forward. And I would just sort of also note that whilst not part of this initiative, hopefully to complement it, there is going to be a York Freight Forum to engage with different people involved, different organisations involved in the freight business within the city centre, to consider all aspects of freight transport within the City of York, which will obviously also contribute to the local, as has been said, to the local transport plan refresh. So this is important work which I would like to support.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report, and I think it's important to consider how this will impact on the perception of York. Many businesses want really to trumpet the sustainability and economic and environmental features, and this plays very strongly into it. And not quite mentioned in the report, but it will hopefully result in fewer chunks being taken out of our historic buildings within the city centre, because that is a perennial issue, and therefore having smaller as well as low emission or no emission vehicles delivering those final mile will make a huge impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Kilbane.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. Again, welcome this report. As somebody that's worked out of York's only transshipment hub for the best part of the last 10 years, it's great to see that idea expanding in the city, because I can tell you it works. It works really well in terms of reducing vehicle journeys around the city. We do have another typo though, I'm afraid. On page 372, it says the pilot project will ensure that those involved are paid at least the minimum wage. Well, obviously we are a real living wage paying council, so that surely should be saying the real living. I'm assuming that's a typo. We're not going to trumpet the fact that we're going to stick to the law. So I'm assuming that should say real living wage.
Yeah.
So as indicated in the report, we're looking at under the pilot project to facilitate micro hubs. So it may be that the council does have no direct contractual relationship with the people undertaking the activity at the micro hubs. So what we'll be looking to do is ensure that they pay the statutory minimum wage rather than the living wage, because we have no discretion in respect of directing them to pay the living wage. We wouldn't have a contractual relationship with them. We would be seeking to facilitate the use of a micro hub as part of the project.
Thank you very much for that. So we have the recommendations that are in front of us from page 353. Can I see those in favour of accepting those recommendations? That's a clear majority in favour of that. Thank you very much. That then takes us on to agenda item 12, which is our response to the National Bus Strategy. And back to Neil.
Thank you again, Chair. The Government has requested that the City of York Council consider the matters raised in this report before the end of June, or the council or the bus operators within the city would lose the COVID support grant. This COVID support grant is being used by those services at this moment, and they're heavily reliant on it due to the social distancing requirements in the operation of their services at this time. The options for June are laid out in the paragraph 20 to 22, with a recommendation to create an enhanced partnership with the city's operators, with a mandate to bring back a York bus service improvement plan for York in September, prior to the DFT's other mandated deadline, which is to have a plan in place by October 2021. In respect to the comments by Councillor Crawshaw in terms of the opportunities to enhance the bus operation, we'll make sure that officers get in touch with them so that that's fed into the development of the plan.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. And I'll go to Councillor de Gaulle first.
Yes, again, as has been described, this is obviously quite a fast-moving situation, and this actually comes out of the National Bus Strategy, which the government published in March of this year, with a deadline has been referred to for a response from the authority by June, and I believe we have already all local authorities have been allocated some money to develop the enhanced partnership or franchise arrangements as they choose in order to continue drawing down this funding, which is currently supporting the bus operation. I think we do need to acknowledge the 2 decades of work in York with the Quality Bus Partnership, which has enabled us to have good relations with bus operators in the city, and as referred to in the report, a very successful park and ride operation, which, as has been also commented on, is now largely run with electric vehicles, and despite the pandemic during the course of the past year. We have also, as a result of the Quality Bus Partnership, developed various improvements such as real-time bus tracking, new bus shelters, cross-ticketing options, and the clean air zone, with upgrades to vehicles and wider investment in various traffic management measures across the city. So given the complexities and challenges unique to York, the recommendation is for enhanced partnership delivery model, although we will be also watching closely the experiences of other areas that go down the franchising route to keep that under close consideration as we progress towards York and North Yorkshire potentially becoming a combined authority. So at this stage, in order to ensure we can develop this bus strategy in the timescales available, we are supporting the development of enhanced partnership, which will then allow the negotiations to take place on that bus service improvement plan for the city. And that does really, as been referred to, opens up the opportunity, particularly for us to have a complete review of the network which we've inherited, to take account of changes such as micro mobility and other changes to travel patterns, so that we can actually develop and offer a public transport offer for the city, which reflects the real needs of our communities.
Thank you very much, Councillor de Gaulle. So open the item for any questions or comments. If not, we've got the Councillor Kilbane. I have to get used to people indicating slightly now that Councillor Waller's got into the habit of quicker indication, although I think Councillor Smalley forgot completely earlier, but Councillor Kilbane.
Just very briefly, Chair, thanks, and thanks for the report. Just to echo Councillor Crawshaw's view that there could well be a role for scrutiny in this aspect in terms of reviewing our strategy to make sure we're ambitious enough.
Thank you very much. I think, Neil, you'd agree to contact Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, absolutely, we'll agree. Contact Councillor Crawshaw, and I'll work with Councillor Kilbane as to which scrutiny we should take this to.
Councillor de Gaulle.
Quick one, which I should also acknowledge, is obviously we have the York Bus Forum, which has significant engagement, and that will, no doubt will want to contribute to that sort of policy review.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendations in front of us, starting from page 379. Can I please see those in favour of accepting those recommendations? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. That takes us through to agenda item 13, urgent business. I've not been notified of any urgent business. So just to say thank you all for those attending in person. I'm sure the first of many now as we gradually come back, and also those still watching on the live stream. Thank you. Bye-bye.